So welcome back to my OC development journey series. It's crazy to me that this is the fourth one of mine, but let's be honest, I have a ton of OCs, and that's why I've made a whole ass webcomic about them. Anyway, today I'm going to be talking about a character whose journey has been, let's say, less traditional than my last three. Let's talk about Kaori Koritsu. For a bit of context, my webcomic is called Keys of Corruption. It's about a world where only 1% of the population is born with special powers called keys, and distressing things start to happen to Rose Kingsley when her mentor dies. This sets in motion a dangerous chain of events that will change Rose's life forever. Rose was actually the first one I did in this series, so we're basically onto the side characters now. The first chapter is up pretty much on most webcomic sites, or at least the ones that I know about, and new chapters will be coming in the summer. So if you're even remotely interested, maybe you should stick around and follow me on Instagram. There'll be small updates on there. Anyway, onto the video. I'm planning to redraw Kaori in 3 of her many different prototypes. The first one will be Kaori Koritsu, the Jujutsu Kaisen OC. I made Kaori as an OC maybe a few months after season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen had actually finished airing. I hadn't read the manga yet, so my knowledge of how the JJK world actually worked was incredibly limited, and I'm pretty sure they were just finishing the Shibuya arc. But that didn't stop me from creating. Since I had no idea how curse techniques work, and it wasn't till Hikari showed up in the manga, did I realize you could just do whatever you wanted. Like, there were kind of no rules about what techniques you could make. But I didn't know that yet, so I ended up basing Kaori's technique off of Gojo's technique. I ended up making Kaori a distant relative of him who actually ended up being looked after him while she was in high school, the same way that Fushiguro was looked after by Gojo. Her curse technique was spatial warping, and basically meant that Kaori could manipulate space. She could teleport, she could move people by moving space around them, and she could use it as attacks. Essentially, she was designed to be a lesser version of Gojo. So by now, it should be obvious that this iteration of Kaori is not as original as the name original character suggests. She was like my 4th OC I ever made, so we're gonna give younger me a break. However, I'm about to add another layer. Kaori was also a cursed vessel. Yes, I am ticking every single YN box I could give her. She was supposed to be a Yuji Itadori love interest, so I wanted her to have a reason to meet Yuji after he came back to life. And the easiest way I could justify Gojo telling her was if she was in a similar boat. My ideas for Kaori kind of dropped off at this point. I didn't really know where I wanted to go with her, and she basically was just a blank character with no personality and nothing to differentiate her with against the cast of camp and boisterous characters that are already in JJK. The only thing that I knew I really wanted to do with her was to make her incredibly lonely. Koritsu, as far as I'm aware, means lonely in Japanese, so that's kind of the direction I was wanting to go, but I stopped developing this character not long after I made her. It was 2 years after this decision that led me to her second prototype, Kaori Koritsu in Keys of Corruption. Now you're probably thinking, hey Sage, shouldn't the webcomic version be the last version of Kaori? And to that I would say, you're right. But I also said that this was a very untraditional character development. When I was developing the world and loose story for Keys of Corruption, it came to my immediate attention that I had way too many soft and introverted characters. Which isn't a bad thing, but it was kind of making them all blend together because I'm not introverted, so I find it a little bit more difficult to write introverted characters. Kaori was one of the ones that I looked at and knew that I had to find a way to make her decently important world building wise. I really wanted to keep the idea that she had a separate entity in her head that was constantly fighting for control, and ended up tying that into the world's power system. Keys, like I said earlier. I thought that if her ki had been corrupted, then it would make sense that it would be fighting back against her own body. But in order for this to make sense in the context of the world, I had to think of a valid way for her ki to be corrupted. I wanted to keep the horror of her backstory, which was that her family all died when she was a child, which is so very YN of her, and that she became a cursed vessel not long after it. The idea that I settled on was that she was the daughter of a prestigious family, and her family were keeping her safe. But one day a group of radical religious people came and stabbed her in the heart, and it corrupted her ki. Keys of Corruption talks a lot about discrimination, prejudice, fascism, and classism, So this new backstory actually hit all of those points. I actually ended up developing a whole religious system with complex relations with it, so that I could explore Kaori having a large crisis of faith. When it comes to Kaori's personality, now that I have her backstory down, I was actually able to develop her. I made her quiet and introverted, and a little socially awkward around people who aren't in her immediate circle of friends, but she's headstrong and quick to action. Most of all, despite her ki being cursed, Kaori is one of the better fighters within her friend group. She's ready to protect them all whenever she needs to, but the more she uses her ki, the increased risk that the shadow curse that lives in her head will take over. I actually love this Kaori a lot. She's bisexual, but hasn't realized that liking girls is an option yet, and I will fight very hard to let everyone know that she is bi, because when she realizes it, it's kind of similar to how I realized I was bi, except for mine was more comical and I'm not in love with my best friend. Loose spoilers for Keys of Corruption there. But now this version was developed, let's check back in with her third prototype. Kaori Koritsu, the Jujutsu Kaisen OC. Again. So this came about because I read the manga, and then with the previous development of her with Keys of Corruption, I realized that I could go in the socially awkward direction. The I never spoke to people in my life angle could be fun to play across with the very loud characters of the JJK ensemble. I also love writing angst. And we were in the middle of the culling games when I caught up, so I knew her being related to Gojo and dating Yuji Itadori would be awesome. One of the main things that separates this version of Kaori and the Keys of Corruption version of Kaori is that I was watching Arcane Season 1 again. I was really intrigued by the mental health issues that Jinx had because they were portrayed so creatively. I did a bit of research into what Jinx actually had, and I came across a list which was something like BPD, bipolar, and schizophrenia. At the time, I didn't know the difference between BPD and bipolar, but I do now. One of my friends has BPD, and Bob from the Thunderbolts movie, specifically the movies, because I know in the comics it's a little different, has bipolar. But at the time, I didn't know the difference, so I looked into schizophrenia. As I was researching, I realized that I could actually do a lot with Kaori having schizophrenia in the JJK universe. Like, that world is so fucked up that her having mental health issues would be completely overlooked, which also went along with the themes that Gojo was trying to fight for. And that's when I had an idea. Kaori had schizophrenia, but because she was a cursed vessel, people around her thought her hallucinations and delusions were actually valid, so no one picked up on it. It's not until Yuji comes along does Gojo realize that Kaori is actually suffering with something else, and this idea became the basis of her new character. This prototype of Kaori has been on survival mode for so long that she lacks the agency in her life that she actually needs. She does as she's told, she keeps quiet, and she speaks when spoken to. It's her relationship with Itadori that makes her realize that she could do more, which eventually leads her to making the decision to leave Jujutsu High and become a curse user. So the outfit I'm drawing her in right now is her curse user fit. She's so cool, right? She doesn't become a curse user until after Shibuya, and when Tengen reveals that Kenjaku basically has everything that he wants. Now, I love this version of Kaori, maybe a little bit more than the Keys of Corruption version of Kaori, but the main reason that these two versions of her are entirely separate is because by the time I realized I wanted to write her with schizophrenia, the cursed keys had already been fully developed. I mean, I have multiple characters who have more than one voice in their head because of cursed keys, and I didn't want to potentially blur the lines between schizophrenia and the cursed keys. However, I really like the idea of having a main character with schizophrenia, where her mental issues aren't the main focus of what she's dealing with, so I have pocketed the idea for a separate comic I would love to make. I am also hyper aware that I need to do a ton more research into it since books and comics have very different ways of presenting information. But yeah, that is my 3 prototypes of Kaori Koritsu. If I'm being honest with myself, she only really ever had 3 prototypes anyway, and as I'm writing Kaori and Keys of Corruption, I'm finding that some of her personality is kind of blurring between the two, which I'm okay with. You know, if Kaori wants to lack agency in her life in Keys of Corruption, she can do that. Like, that's on you, girl. You do you. I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. I love talking about my OCs, so make sure to subscribe or save the playlist if you like hearing me ramble too. Thank you so much for watching, and maybe I'll see you in my next one.